Welcome everybody to another conversation. If you were with us this past weekend on Saturday, we had a conversation that we called Board of Education, where we were just talking about a lot of the issues that, as teachers, as administrators, as parents, as students, we have encountered in the education system here in America. And what we wanted to do was go a little bit deeper into the conversation with one of our guests returning, Miss Lakeisha. And then we also brought in another teacher, Mr. Clarence, Mr. Monsanto. So we're going to jump right in. And the first thing that I would like to hear from you guys, and Clarence, if you wouldn't mind starting, I want to talk about teachers and the workloads and how that affects the teacher's ability to engage the students, maybe at a deeper level or on the level that the student is requiring that attention, if that makes sense.
I think it depends on the level in terms of when you're talking about K-12. Um, at the elementary level, I think that it is harder because elementary teachers have to be almost like a jack of all trades. So they're teaching English language arts, they're teaching writing, they're teaching grammar, they're teaching social studies, science, and mathematics. As opposed to when you move to secondary, meaning middle and high school, you now get into your discipline. So you're really only teaching your discipline, English or mathematics or science. So when I think from a secondary perspective, it's easier to engage because you know your content, and the longer you've been teaching, you become an expert in your content. So now it's about figuring out what are the learning modalities of your students so that you can adapt lessons to engage the various modalities that students learn from.
Okay. What about you, Miss Keisha?
I think that it is a challenge for elementary teachers, primarily because we are a jack of all trades. We teach all content areas, and so it requires us to be able to differentiate, integrate more so for our students. Where you'll find a lot of math science integration or ELA and social studies, and so with those integrations, it requires a teacher to have more of a skill set in areas that they may not necessarily be strong. You'll find in elementary settings, especially here in Georgia, specifically in my district, that many of those our teachers in our intermediate grades, which are third, fourth, and fifth, we begin to departmentalize simply because it gives those teachers an opportunity to home in on those particular subject areas that they have the greatest expertise or the greatest strength. Whereas in our K2 teachers, our pre-K through second grade teachers are still kind of strapped with having to be able to do it all and to do it all efficiently because they're the foundation for learning. And so in those primary grades, we find that teachers have to be great teachers of reading. That's not necessarily something they come out of college with. They don't necessarily come out of college with an innate ability to teach reading. That's a science. And so I can just speak for my own district. We take a great interest in that. Whereas and we require that all of our K2 teachers become reading endorsed or reading certified, simply because it is a very intricate piece of the academic process for our kids. And so you'll find that as I see you move into your secondary areas of middle school and high school, sometimes teachers hold on to that creativity of holding in their students, but then a lot of times we see them as being older. And so we remove some of the bells and whistles that they may have received in elementary school and just kind of tend to go more to a lecture style. And in some cases that works for some students, and in other cases it doesn't. But you there are some teachers that still hold on to that very elementary way of delivery, so that they're often always looking for a way to engage their students, whether it be with a real world application, whether it be with an interest of the student. And then a lot of times when you see in the secondary area, we like to give content, content, content. Well, the new way is ABC, activity before content. So allowing the kids to kind of think about the process, think about what might happen, giving them a chance to kind of form their own thought process about what they're going to learn. And then as they're learning it, apply it to either say, hey, I was right on, right? Or I wasn't, and now I want to know more. So it's really about engaging them to the point where they want to learn. But primary teachers, elementary teachers, we have a great responsibility of priming the brain for learning,
Hmm.
priming the brain so that it is interested in the learning process.
So, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what you're saying, it's kind of more about the teachers engaging the students in such a way that they're able to receive what the teacher is putting out there rather than the workload itself.
Correct. Right.
Okay.
So we want our kids, see, a lot of times we become overwhelmed with the amount of standards or the curriculum that needs to be shared. We share with our teachers, if you are teaching each standard and you understand truly what the standard is asking of the student, then you have the autonomy to integrate that. Creating those real world connections is going to be paramount for students in the classroom. Because how many times as a student have you thought, why am I learning this? Like, what am I going to
Many.
do with trigonometry in the real world, right? And so oftentimes they disassociate what they're learning from what they're living, right? And so when you connect the living and the learning together, then it becomes relevant, and then they want to know more because they have to keep living. So evidently I need to do more learning so that it becomes an ease of the both, right? And so I
Hmm.
think that's where, as teachers, we are responsible for creating that bridge between living and learning.
So it's almost kind of like, as students, we tend to disengage when we feel like, I don't need this, I don't need that. And as the educator, it's on you guys to say, no, you might think that you don't need it, and I understand that you think that, but here's why and how you do need it. Here's
Right.
the situations in real life where that's going. Okay, I follow that. And so, when you're speaking and you're talking about engaging the students, that's something that you brought up on Saturday, and I wanted to throw it to you, Clarence, and I wanted to talk about engaging the students, engaging parents, engaging their families. Um, what are some ways that as educators you guys could be better? And then what are some of the ways that you have gone about engaging your students and their families?
Um, Engagement in terms of just the family, I think for me, um, when things weren't virtual, one of the things that I tried to ensure I did was because we start in August, I would say by October, I've done a home visit for most of my students, if not all. Um, and the first thing in the first contact is about creating a rapport with parents. Also, one of the things I find is that communication has to be two ways. So I use two different tools. One of them is an app called Remind, and the other one is email. Reason why is because I use Remind and I get parents to sign up using their email address because I work at a Title I school, using their email address, and I send out emails because people don't change emails addresses on a regularly. They don't generally change you might change your work one if you move, but your email address tends to stay the same. Therefore, statistics say that 90% of households in America have a cell phone or smartphone or some type of smart device, which allows for emails to be able to come to them. This way, both of the tools that I use are two-way devices, meaning I can send out information and they can reply back to me only, and it's still private. Um, And so this way, I engage parents by letting them know what is transpiring in class. So I do something at the beginning of the week, meaning a two weeks at a glance. So what we're doing for 2 weeks, I send out so that parents know. And I'm talking about the lessons that I'm going to be teaching, the topics and concepts, and also the assignments, so that this way students can't tell them, I don't remember what we did, because the first thing you ask, what you do in school today? I don't know. Um, so this way, parents know. As a parent, I know that the more information that I have, the more I can help my children.
Right.
So therefore, I feel the same, that the more information that I give to parents, the more they're able to help their children also. In addition to that, because I'm a do air quotes, they say there's a new way of doing math. Um, in addition to that, I also have an Instagram page where I work out problems so that parents can actually see it, parents and students, they can see what we're doing in class so that they have an idea of how they may potentially be able to help their student, um, if they have that skill set. And then the other thing is making parents feel comfortable with asking questions,
Hmm.
because to me, it's a synergetic relationship. Because if the parents and I are working together, then the student has to fall in line. Because what tends to happen is when there's lack of communication, the child can play both the school and the parents against themselves. But if there's communication, consistent, respectful communication, then students aren't able to fall through those gaps. And parents feel comfortable with addressing anything that's taking place or what they don't understand. So it's all about comfort, it's about being respectful, and it's about, for me, being empathetic as a parent, putting myself in their shoes, understanding the things that I want, they're going to want also.
Wow. Yeah. I actually the whole. I mean, I wish technology was as big as it is now. When I was younger and going through school, because the whole idea of working out problems on Instagram and videos so that parents can see it is it's amazing. And when you mentioned making sure that the parents feel comfortable asking questions, I like that too because I remember being taught, there's no such thing as a dumb question or a stupid question, however it was worded. And the more I've grown, I've realized that I would have to disagree with that. There are such things as stupid questions, but not usually. Um, in a lot of instances, I feel like people are afraid to ask questions because they've been made to feel like not knowing something is wrong, like ignorance is wrong. And I think that has to do with kind of the way, as a society, we talk about ignorance. We make it sound like the word ignorant means you're stupid rather than it means you don't know something in this particular area. Yeah, exactly. And so, before I go to Keisha, what I'd like to ask you, Clarence, is how do you make sure that the parents are comfortable with asking questions? Like, make them not feel like I'm stupid if I ask this question.
Well, again, it goes to that first contact. So by doing home visits, and I'll say this: some people tell me that that's maybe antiquated, but being at a Title One school, and then also coming from, I've worked in the elementary setting before. So by meeting with parents in their own home or at a place of their designation, there's a comfort there for
Right.
them, because everybody doesn't have the same positive experiences that other people may have had, depending on their social economics and things of that nature. So understanding that everybody sends their children to school to get a good education, and nobody keeps the good kids at home, and just sends the bad ones. So they are entrusting us to do our best, but they might not have those positive experiences. And so by me
Hmm.
coming on, I try to create a positive experience so that we can make a connection. And then from there, they're willing to hear me out if there ever is a problem.
Right.
Give me the benefit of the doubt,
Hmm.
because most of the time, most parents only hear from the school when there's a problem.
Right. Okay.
So
And I follow that logic because that's kind of how I interact with people on social media. Like a lot of the issues that are more polarizing, where it's like I'm on this side and you're on that side, and I'm gonna just go at your head. I simply walk into the middle and seek understanding and to give understanding. And it might not happen in that moment, but then in the future, they're like, "Oh, I remember that guy. He was at least willing to hear me out." And so when I'm speaking to him, it's not, "Oh, he's just judging me or attacking me for my views and beliefs." So yeah, I definitely I dig that approach, and I think that we need more of it. But what about you, Miss Keisha? What are some ways that you engage the students and their families to help facilitate a better, more comfortable, safer learning environment?
Well, first and foremost, like much like Clarence, we have a system that we use to as a primary source of communication with parents. We use Class Dojo. He used Remind. We use the Class Dojo concept, and Class Dojo is, if you're not familiar with it, it's a behavior modification tool, and it's also a communication tool that keeps the doors of communication open in real time. I remember being a kid, and if someone got in trouble in school, it was the doom of, I'm going to call your mother, right? And so you knew that around 3 o'clock when school was over, this impending call was going to come. And so you ran home trying to intervene and trying to take the phone off the hook, or, something, my mom is asleep, you want to answer the phone. And so long gone are those days. Class Dojo allows our teachers and educators to communicate in real time, much like a text message with our parents, to keep them abreast of what is going on in the classroom. If your student is off task, you can deduct a point from the student, and that notification goes right to the parent. Your child was off task, and the point allocation is very specific, whether it's good participation or lack of participation. It was either a plus or a minus. And so we assign at our school a point system. And so we have monthly dojo champions where a boy and a girl is chosen for having the most points. And again, there's more ways to earn points than there is to lose points. But kids like that instantaneous, immediate gratification of I'm doing well, or that
Hmm.
immediate correction of what I need to do better. And so Class Dojo works well for us as a school. My entire school is a dojo school. So the communication is consistent from pre-K all the way through fifth grade. So a parent that has a kindergartner and also has a third grader is getting the same level of communication no matter what grade level their child is in. And so that consistency, like Clarence alluded to, is very, very important in building those relationships between parents. Also, we have, as a Title I school, we're also a Title I school, and we have a parent liaison. That has been extremely beneficial to bridging the gap. And I talked about this on Saturday briefly, bridging the gap between the classroom teacher and the parent. You're right. Parents are not always comfortable with stating their deficit, right? They don't want to go into the classroom and seem like they don't know. So most of them just don't show up. And so we have created an environment where we're providing workshops on a weekly, monthly basis. We do district-wide parent days where they get to come in and learn about that new math that Clarence was talking about. They get to come in and learn about what a Lexile score is, because in education, we send out a whole lot of acronyms, right? DIBELS and ACT, SAT. And a lot of times that goes right over our parents' head. Not that they're ignorant, but they just haven't been exposed to it. And so it's our responsibility, like I said on Saturday, we have to teach our children through our parents, because the stronger
Hmm.
our parents are, the stronger our children will be. And so it can't be, oh, I only teach children. No, I teach the community. And if my community is aware of what is going on, then the community can support, which Kenny spoke about on Saturday too, but that community mindset can now come into play. If I can walk into the local Zaxby's and see my school's data on the wall, guess what? Everybody in that community is now held accountable to whether or not the kids at my school are reading above or below grade level. You can no longer say, I didn't know. So access to data and information, even for all stakeholders, is very important as we build those bridges between our parents. Also, I like to toot the horn at my school. We're a service school. We serve the community. We give out sneakers at Christmas time, coat drives, and these initiatives are started by our teachers. This is not something that the administration has gone and said, this is what you need to do. I have a teacher who decided that she, as a child, did not have new sneakers until she was a high schooler. She never had a new pair of tennis shoes until she was in high school. And she remembered how that felt as she navigated through. She didn't want any other child to ever feel that way. And so every Christmas, she would, out of her own pocket, buy tennis shoes, right, for students that she knew were in need. And it caught on like wildfire. Happened to be at a conference. An educator heard about it immediately. She wrote a check for $500. Here's my contribution to your school and your initiative. So now we have an initiative every year called Dee's Holiday Souls, right? Where we give out brand new tennis shoes to over 50, 60 kids in our building. We have Operation Warm Coat, where we've had a teacher write a grant and ask for companies to donate coats, because we have children that in 20, 30 degree weather are coming to school with no coat, no socks, no shoes, and so those types of things. So again, it's about the heart of the teacher, that we realize that we don't just teach the children, we have to teach the family, because as goes the family, goes the child, right? Something as simple as posturing. When we have conferences, we don't sit across the table from parents, we sit side by side. And the first thing is, I'm a mom just like you. Even as an administrator, when I'm disciplining someone's child and I have to give a disciplinary action, whether it be suspension or in-school suspension, the first thing I say is, I understand on this side of the desk, I'm an administrator. On your side, I'm a parent. And there are some rules that cross over between what happens in your neighborhood and what happens at school. And unfortunately, that's a line we have to toe, but it doesn't mean that I don't understand it. Because see, at home, if somebody hits your sister, you better hit them back, because that's what your mom says. And you know what? I'm not here to tell you not to follow the rules of your mother. But I am telling you, at school, there are different rules that we have to apply, and that these are the things that are in place to assist you in the event you find yourself in that type of situation. It's never to negate what the home is teaching the child, always to support and to show the extension of what we teach and why it's relevant. And I think parents understand that. I've had more parents break down in my office. I have to excuse the students sometimes and just let mom or dad have a moment, because oftentimes we don't know the pressures or the situations that have compounded into why this child may or may not be achieving academically, or may not be behaving. So again, it's important that we look at the totality of the child. And that means everybody that touches that child is relevant in the strengthening of our community in our schools. And so when we see stakeholders, it's all stakeholders. It's the person that washes the cars outside. It's the man that stands on the corner and hands out the pamphlets. It's the person that packs your groceries at the grocery store. It is everybody. So no longer can we say, what do you want to do? You want to be working at McDonald's when you grow up? Guess what? That's extremely offensive to the child whose mom works at McDonald's, because that's how she puts food on their table. So for you to discount the value of the McDonald's worker is really disrespectful to the child. And so you can't build a relationship when those are the kind of implicit biases that sit in our classroom. So that is some of the things that we work on in professional development, teaching our teachers how to be sensitive. I'm not telling you to be sympathetic. Like, this is not sympathy. Kids don't want your sympathy. And I think I said that's at it. They don't want your sympathy. They want you to see them for themselves. They want you to provide for them based on who they are, not what they were born into, what they have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. In many cases, our kids escape their real lives and come to school. We're their safety net. we're that place where the consistency of my teacher is the only piece of my life that's consistent. When I walk into my building, I know my teacher's going to be standing at that door waiting to greet me. That I can count on. My mom being home at night cooking dinner, I might not be able to count on that. My dad coming to pick me up on the weekend, not able to count on that either. But my teacher, Monday through Friday, waiting with open arms to greet me, that they can count.
Okay, so my question, and to both of you, and it doesn't matter which one of you answers first. You know, you both did a little bit of talking about empathy, being able to identify and understand with your students and their families, the community that they're a part of. Keisha, you kind of spoke to towing the line of what's acceptable outside of school versus what's acceptable inside of school, and then kind of spoke a little bit to the fact that as students we have to learn those lines, as parents we have to know it to be able to tell our children, and then as teachers we have to understand the lines that these kids are walking, because like you said, hey, somebody in the neighborhood hits your sister, you hit them back. At school, that's not how we handle things. And so the question that I want to bring up out of all of that is um, teachers and the vetting of teachers, and making sure that we um, hire teachers who are ready, willing, and able to do the work that is necessary to adequately equip our children for the future, right? I titled this one Born to Educate because one of the things that came up, and pretty sure it was after we ended the live, Keisha, you were talking about, like, this is my mission, this is my life's calling. And I know that's something to be true about Clarence. And so, how do we avoid having people who weren't born to do this job do this job?
I'm going to say that education is a tale of three cities, not just two. And by that, what I mean is that you have urban, suburban, and rural schools, and they're all unique. Um, so the thing about it is that what tends to happen in your rural and in urban areas, and this is in statistics to verify this, is you don't always have people who are qualified to do the job. So you have in many urban and rural areas, you have teachers who are on provisional licenses, meaning they don't have a valid teaching license and they're going through a process to get their license. That doesn't tend to happen in suburban schools. In suburban schools, um, you tend to have people who are ready and qualified, at least on paper.
Right.
Then, on top of that, then there's what I call being culturally relevant. So, do you understand the community that you're going into? And just because you're black doesn't mean that you understand a urban community. Just because you're white doesn't mean that you understand a rural community. So there has to be some cultural understanding, and you have to take off, to me, you have to take off and throw away biases that we may not even know that we have, and just be honest about certain things. Um, so for me, I think that when it comes to the other two, because like I said, there's a tale of three cities. Suburban schools tend to be better funded, um, because you have different break bases, and everything is about money. So in an urban area, because you don't have the same tax structure and people paying the amount of money that a suburban school does in terms of property taxes or sales taxes or whatever it is that helps to fund education, there's a difference in the funding sources. I'm gonna say that. And then when you start dealing with Title One schools and people in lower income, you start understanding that there are other variables that are taking place. So in urban areas, homelessness, single parent homes, um, all of those factors play into when you people think about PTA parent teachers. Well, if I'm the working poor, it's different than if I'm a salaried employee. I can take off from work as a salaried employee and still get paid.
Hmm.
As an hourly employee, if I take off, I don't get generally don't get paid. So there are different variables that take place when you start talking about the teachers, the system, and all of that things that encompass it.
Okay. And so I do have a question, but before I ask my question, one of our Twitch viewers, Jennifer, she asked the question: how do we get that exposure if it's nowhere near us? That exposure to these different communities that we're moving into and working in. Not even just as an educator, because I think one of the things that we've seen in recent years, but especially in this past year with police brutality, is a lot of police officers occupying streets and spaces that they're not too familiar with the community there, which makes it easier to have your hand on on your hip. And so as it relates to teachers, how do we get that exposure so that we're in a position to better serve those communities and those children when it's nowhere around us?
When it's coming, I mean, if you're out of your,
Right. So let's say I'm from a small town in Iowa. I've never been around black people ever, but I feel like I'm supposed to, teach in the hood somewhere. And I go there, and like Clarence brought up, I have those implicit biases. Now, whether or not I'm aware of them, obviously, is going to be one challenge, one hurdle that I have to work through. But how do I equip
prepare
myself?
yourself.
Yeah, exactly. How do I get that exposure rather
I
than
mean,
just walking, or is it just simply going into that position open and willing to learn?
we come across. I'm sorry, Clarence, did you want to respond?
I was going to say it from this perspective. If you're in an education program and you know that you want to teach in an urban school, there are, as you go through, there are practicums that you can take so that you can get practice in those type of settings while you're in school to and it what it does, it allows you to familiarize yourself with it. But not only that, if you're going to go in to an urban setting or rural setting, whatever it is that is different from what you're used to, you have to be open to learning. And you can't come in with blinders thinking that your way is the best way, your way is the only way.
Hmm.
So understanding that other cultures view different things differently. So, and then to listen, being willing to listen to understand instead of willing to listen so that you can respond or give a retort or defend yourself. Because more times than not, I find that it's better to understand than to be understood because as long as I understand where my parents are coming from, they're going to continue to work with me. When I'm trying to make them understand me, then that can be disjointed and that can cause problems. So being willing to listen, being willing to learn, and to be willing to try to understand instead of being understood.
Use as a classroom teacher years ago, I would always use the feel, felt, found. I understand how you feel. I felt that way in some way in the past, but what I found out was, okay, because it's really ultimately about the education of the event, right? We don't really learn much from the event itself. We really learn from the outcome, what happens after it's over. Because in the moment, many of us aren't even thinking when the event is going on. I think that teachers that have decided to take on an urban school system or, as they say, teach in the hood, whatever they call it, I think one, you have to go in understanding that these are children, whether they were on the north side, the south side, the east side, or the west side, that these children deserve to be taught. And so everything that you learned about teaching children effectively is what you bring to the table. Now, once you get there, you will begin to see some patterns and some ways, and you may begin to not adapt, but to take in the information. Like Clarence said, you have to kind of just be a sponge, soak it up, right? I've been teaching I've been at the same school for 20 years. Okay, let's start there. So I've seen children come and go, their children come and go. And so with that, I'm a pillar in the community, right? So it's important that the people of the community see me. I make it my business at least once or twice a month to shop in the community in which I serve. I could come home an hour away and do my grocery shopping. But before the pandemic, I made it my business to be in that community. My kids' faces light up when they see their principal or their assistant principal in the aisle in Kroger, right? Because they see me now as a human being, right? Who eats and breathes and sleeps. They see me with my children. They like, oh, she has a family. I'm not just this entity of authority over them, but I'm a person that coexists with them. And so they value my words more because they see me living the words. Okay.
Right.
And so those are the things that innovation in leadership and in teaching has to happen. We get a lot of Teach for America students that come in, not from our area and are sent there to teach our children. But guess what? I have some of the same issues with my teachers that are born and raised there because those implicit biases are there. We talk to our children as if an African-American teacher is a better teacher for an African-American child. There's no research that says that. There's a connection. But in often cases, we can be the worst because we don't talk to our children the way we talk to other children of other nationalities because there's a sense of comfort, right? And sometimes we supersede that level of comfort to try to drive our point, okay? And so we often as leaders have to remind our teachers that we treat all of our children equally with equity, giving each and every one of them what they need when they need it. So when I think about the innovation of, you said something about, and Clarence spoke about the parent that's an hourly worker. Guess what? This is where good, sound educational leadership comes on. Because you know where sometimes we do parent conferences? In the break room at Walmart. Because see, I come to you when you're on your break. Because we make the assumption that parents are not interested in their children's education because they don't show up at PTA, or they don't show up for the conference, or they don't respond during the middle of the day when you send an email. And it's the furthest from the truth. It's just that my life is set up in a way that I can't do that. If I pick up my phone while I'm at work, I lose my job. My kids have nowhere to live. They have nowhere to eat. And so sometimes we are so disconnected from that we forget how hard it is for some Americans to survive. And many of us are just one paycheck away from poverty. So we haven't really gone too far. But so we do things as a school. And again, this goes back to the leadership of the school. And I have an amazing leader that I sit under. And we will go to Walmart in the break room and have a parent conference. I will stand out in the parking lot of Kroger and talk to you about your child if that is what it takes to make sure child sees that the home and school is working collectively together and that we are on the same page. And so, like Clarence said, you can't play those two ends against the middle because we're all accountable for you. And so when parents would come to PTA and say, "Oh, my neighbors didn't come," well, I need you to go home and tell them all the great information because guess what? Your neighbor's kids sit next to your kids, and so you should have just as much of an interest in your neighbor's kids as you do in your own, because ultimately there will come a time in your child's life that their peers will influence them more than you. And so it is going to be important that you be a sounding board for those parents that may not feel comfortable. It was one thing I found out when I was an academic coach. Parents, we talked about they're kind of they didn't like the content, right? I had many parents that would come into my sessions and say, "You know, Miss Anderson, I'm just not good at math. Math is not my thing." Right? They would say that just so plainly and boldly. "Girl, I don't do no math now. You can have that." But very few parents walked into my session and said, "You know what? I can't read." Right? None of them say that because of the stigma that society has put on illiteracy, right? So it's not so socially acceptable to not be able to read, but it's socially acceptable not to do science and social studies, right? And not to necessarily be a great writer. But if you know, so some of our parents were struggling with reading. They were surprised to see their own Lexile scores. But see, that's the thing. Like, we have to remove those barriers so that we can say what you say out of your mouth, your children are listening. So when mom says, "I'm not good at math, my mama wasn't good at math, nobody in the family has ever been good at math," the child has already accepted the fact that he or she will not try to be good at math, right? And so we have to teach our parents how just their daily living impacts and affects their children's learning, which will ultimately impact and affect their living. And so it really takes a lot for us. And when you talked about the workload of teachers, this is where the workload gets heavy. Because like Clarence said, he's going to people's houses and sitting down on their couches and saying, "Hey, how can I help your child be better?" But he's taken away from his child, right? He has a family at home, but he's vested and committed to the success of the masses. And many of our teachers are that way as well. So when they're staying up beyond and they're taking those phone calls long after they should have cut their phones off, guess what? And I'll tell you this, in this virtual environment, we actually have worked longer hours in the virtual environment than we did when we were in brick and mortar, because now people feel like it's all technology based. They got 24-hour access. It's like a 24-hour hotline. When the parent gets off at midnight, they're calling. I had a father call me at 5 o'clock in the morning to tell me how bad everything was, to come to find out that it was him that had not completed his task. And at the end of the conversation, it was like, "Oh, my bad. You know what? You the bomb." But at 5 a.m., I had to get hit with how inadequate my school was, how people didn't help him, how we wanted his child to fail. But ultimately, the responsibility of the entire situation rested on him saying, "Oh, yeah, you know what? You did tell me I needed that form. My bad, I'm going to get it today. You know what? You the bomb." But at 5 a.m., which one of you are willing to open up your phone lines to talk to somebody about somebody else at 5 a.m.? But that is the role and the plight of the educator today. And so that's why I said we got to see that it's a collective work for all of us to make this work for everybody, for our kids to be successful. And where they live and their economic background, yeah, funding is interesting. But guess what? I've learned as an administrator that I can be creative in the funding that's given to me. So you give me $1,000, I'm gonna make that $1,000 work for us. You're not gonna give me any more, but I'm gonna make what I did get work. And that's creativity of leadership comes in. And that's why you see the variation in schools. You said, "I've never heard of teachers like this before when I was a kid," right? Because the leadership is progressive and innovative. And that is what is changing education. Education is changing, it's evolving simply because the leadership of education is changing.
Okay, yeah, I'm listening, and I do want to bring up two things that I'm seeing in the comments. But before I do, you brought up, actually, no, not before I do. One of the first question that I want to bring up is from one of our Twitch viewers. It's a game nerd, and he said, "Why are kids pressured from a young age to perform in school? In our school system, kids until 12 years old don't have homework." And so he is in the Netherlands. So the question is, why are kids so pressured from such a young age to perform? But before either of you answer it, I want to bring up the second question too, and then y'all can answer them both together. Um, and so Keller, who was on in a part of the conversation the other day, he brought up the fact that, because Keisha, you were talking about making yourself known in the community that you serve, right? And you also brought up the in this virtual environment, a lot of parents feel like they have this unlimited access. And so his point was, as a new teacher, one of the things that he's been taught is to, and one of the things that he was taught to help avoid burnout is to like make sure that he's distancing himself enough from the like when he's outside of school, he's outside of school. You know what I mean? So how do we walk that line of being a part of the community yet not being so accessible that you open yourself up to burnout? And then also, why are kids being pressured to perform at such a young age?
I think the pressure to perform at such a young age is a social situation. It's what our society has just deemed as appropriate and acceptable. We give homework because parents have been taught in their schooling that when you go to school, you get homework. However, in many other countries, third world countries, that is, Singapore particularly, you don't get homework until you have mastery of a content area, of a content, of that content. So if I'm learning multiplication day one, I may not have homework in multiplication until day 17, because the purpose of homework is for a child to be able to independently complete the task with proficiency. And so we know that research says that if a child completes a task incorrectly numerous times, we have to multiply that by 4 to 5 times to change that what they learned. So, again, it goes back to research-based teaching and learning. And it goes back to the professional development. Many teachers teach the way they were taught. Okay. And in that regard, they still do spelling tests, they do lists and all the things that at one point in time seem to be equated to good learning or a good education. And we've learned over time and with research that a lot of those things were time wasters and just, time fillers. And so, you're writing your spelling words 3 times each. I bet you did it 5 times each. Your multiplication facts 12 times each. It didn't make you any more proficient because you still struggled. Some people are still counting on their fingers because they never mastered the concept. They just mastered the rote responsibility of completing the task. It's like saying, I will not chew gum in the hallway and writing that 1,000 times. Tell me how that helped you remember not to chew gum. It just helped you not get caught, right? That's really all it taught you. So I think that pressure is a social pressure, and it starts with the parents. I have teachers that have parents complain all the time. My child hadn't had homework in a week, but your child may not be in a position where homework is readily available. It's necessary because we haven't gotten to a point where your child can independently complete this task. Because the thing about it is, parents are not supposed to have to teach their children how to do when they get home. That's our job. They're there to support, but the teaching part is totally on us. And so if we still have children who are limited in that area, then we need to address that accordingly through our differentiated instruction, through our small group and our interventions. So to put that responsibility on our parents is in some sense unfair, or even to put our kids in a position where they can't feel successful when they complete a task is unfair. However, in our virtual learning environment, we've kind of been forced to integrate, like I said, educating the child through the parent. Because now I got to teach mom how to do it because she's the one that's physically sitting there with the student. And so now she's assisting in that regard. So it is a kind of a 50-50. Some people say give homework. Some people say don't. I think that's really an administrative situation, a district situation of how they want to see homework. Is it even factored into the grading process? Do you grade homework? Because I feel like anything a child does, it have value, and they should feel that what they did was valued. And so a lot of time teachers they will give homework and put it in the bin, and the kids never see it again, right? It's just going through the formality of having it. Just to speak to the teacher burnout and being able to cut off, think that it is essential in this virtual learning environment that we have some parameters and some times where teachers actually log off and say, hey, this is my time with my family. But when you have effective communication throughout the day, you don't find that you need to have as many conversations after hours. It's when you're not possibly effectively communicating or you have one or two outliers. But again, that goes back to what in my building we call customer service, right? Nobody wants to buy a product and then have to wait until the next business day to talk about it when you need that product to work right then. You want to be able to have that 24/7 hotline. So it's kind of what we think we are entitled to. But I think that teachers, when they set that up, when they're communicating with their parents and parents are respectful of and parents and teachers are respectful of each other, I think that there can be a happy medium. um, Burnout is usually a lot of burnout to me comes with procrastination, honestly. I see my teachers that burn out are some most times very poor time managers. And so it all becomes overwhelming all at one time, and then it's hard to deal with. And so it feels like you're just going to give up. So, I mean, professional development in that area, but yeah, I understand in the virtual setting where we have said to our teachers, give a designated time, but also at the same time, every day my teachers have office hours. After school is over, our kids log off at 2:30. Our teachers have office hours where parents can call in and ask questions. Being accessible or being available is kind of like being on the front end of it instead of having to react or respond to it. We're on the front end. And so I think that again is helpful, but it is what it is at this point in this particular environment. We have to just be willing to be adaptable and flexible with everything that comes with virtual learning.
Okay. Mr. Monsanto.
Um, in terms of the burnout, um, I think that it's an issue in when depending on where you are, because one of the things I also talked about earlier was, have you come into teaching fully licensed, gone through the process, or are you coming in because she talked about Teach for America through an alternative process? So if you're going to school to keep your job at the same time, that can be a lot.
Mhm.
So that's one thing. Um, if you don't enjoy what you're doing,
Hmm.
that's another thing. Because when I find that because this ain't work for me, I get paid to do what I enjoy doing, working with young people and teaching math. Those are two of my passions. So that's not work. But if you consider your job work, then just doing it can be stressful. Um, in addition to that, the being at home in this virtual setting, on top of if you're in school right now, for those who are in school, that's stressful because not only are you thinking about it from the perspective, if you're in there, of potentially getting sick, potentially putting your family at risk to get sick, but if you love what you do, knowing that you want to still do the best for your children. And then there's the what I call equal and equity. Equal means I send out the remind message and the emails to everybody. Equity means that there are some people that I may take a phone call from after hours that I might not take it from others. So everybody don't get the same thing when it comes to in getting on into my time after, I'm gonna use the quotes, after hours. Because as a teacher, and I've been doing this over 2 decades, there's no off time other than the summertime. Reason why? Because on the weekends, I do lesson plans. On the weekends, I grade papers. On the weekends and in the evenings, I also input grades into the system that we use. So I use my own time, and you just have to learn, as Ms. Anderson said, to manage your time and understand what things are. You have to make the main thing the main thing. That's what I found. Do I have a hard cutoff? Yeah, I do now. But since March 13th, I've been doing virtual. So initially, that up until the summertime, I was working till 7, 8 o'clock because I didn't understand how to stop, because all my kids needed different things and I was working to make sure. But then my own son there was limited time with him. So I had to figure out how to make that hard stop, but still give to my families and my students what they needed also. And that is a tricky balance. And that's an individual thing that you have to learn on your own. There's no formula about that and with that, because somebody who's single with no children is different than somebody who's married and has a spouse and 2 children, or somebody who's single and has 2 children. Those are 3 separate situations. Mm-hmm. Now, in terms of the pressure, I think that homework thing that he was talking about, that depends. That is a school to school, district to district, teacher to teacher kind of situation. Reason why I say that is I don't give homework out until at least 80% of my students can do and have shown mastery. They're not in the, I don't give homework to students when most of them are developing that skill, because as she said, when you go home, you practice it wrong. And then I have to undo and unlearn. You have to unlearn those poor habits that you have created for yourself. What I tend to do is I tend to give them things to watch so that they can see it. And that's why I do the Instagram, so that this way they can see. And I will even, my students even ask questions up there so that I'll answer questions for them, because I'm going to give them things that they may not have seen in class. Because the thing is, you have to give as many opportunities to see things in different ways so that they can learn to transfer learning. Because when she was talking about memorizing, that's the base level. That's the knowledge when you memorize something. So you can know something but not be able to comprehend. It's like a kid who can call out words. But reading isn't just I can articulate what I see, it's understanding it also. So when you talk about the pressure aspect and homework, again, I think that it depends on schools, school districts, settings. And then again, it goes even down to the teacher, because different teachers have different policies, understanding that my students are different and I have to differentiate things to make sure that they can be successful, because that's the ultimate goal, is students being successful.
Keisha, you look like you had something you wanted to add to that.
No, I'm just like, yeah, right on, because that's it. I mean, that is really it. And that is the paradigm shift that we are looking for and seeking, that every educator in America sees it from that perspective. Like, we're looking at a country who is being outsourced or outscored by third world countries, and it's like, why? And when we look at some of their practices, and we're not mirroring that. And so, I mean, shout out to my district, because we have just taken a leadership dive into those countries to find out, what are you doing, right? And how is that you are creating this level of success when you supposedly have less resources than we do, right? And so when we talk about Title I and we talk about funding, and it's like, oh yeah, well, our, $60,000 worth of title, funds is not compared to maybe a $6,000 in Singapore, but yet they're outscoring us on the paper and the pencil. And they're also beating our kids out in some cases for the jobs. So we want to make sure, number one, that teacher preparation programs are more comprehensive, that they actually teach some of those innovative practices and strategies so that teachers are able to come into the classroom with those, and there's not such a learning curve that occurs while, because I tell my teachers all the time, you may be in a learning curve, but guess what? Little Johnny didn't get to do second grade over because you were learning, right? His second grade year expires at the end of 180 days, whether you learned how to do it right or not. So while you're trying to figure out the Mimeo board, or you're trying to figure out the laptop or the document camera, his time is ticking. And so that's where I think Clarence was alluding to the breakout, when you're in school trying to learn and teach at the same time. Like, that is a huge undertaking. I'm an advocate for alternative preparation program. I came from corporate America into education, and I came into education with a heart for it, a ministry for it. There's a difference when you
Keisha, you're
become.
really.
There's a difference. Can you hear me now?
It's a little bit better.
There's a difference when you come into this industry with a passion to inflict change versus you looking for the summers off. Because any good teacher knows there's no such thing as an off summer. He said they get summers off. I don't know nothing about that. Okay. I don't know what it's like to have a summer off, because we're in the building as soon as the school year ends, we're in complete preparation for the next one to begin. There is no downtime because the clock is always ticking. And so when parents understand that, when the community stakeholders understand all that teachers put into the preparation of our next generations, I think we as a collective unit could do so much better in support if we truly understood all those little small intricate pieces that have to happen, right? A teacher has to understand in their classroom how to pass out paper. To some people that seems trivial, right? But if I can't manage, I can't teach, right? So something as simple as how I line up, how we walk in the hallway, all of that plays a part of the education process. And parents like, I don't know why my child got to put his finger over his mouth walking down the hallway, because I need him to understand that when you're walking in the learning environment, you need to be respectful of the other learners. That this is a constant reminder for you to be quiet in that time. It's a small gesture for you to learn mutual respect for others in the long run, right? So we as educators are always associating something that we're teaching with something that has to be learned and used later on. And so it's just like asking yourself, when am I going to use trigonometry? You'd be surprised. When am I going to use, why do I need to know the 3 states of matter? You'd be surprised, and so we are there to foster that love of learning in our practices, but sometimes it has to be in a formulated way. And so I think that oftentimes we get upset because those structures have to be in place. They're not always, we don't always agree, but they have to be there so that those constructs for our students are there to keep them safe, number one, in the learning environment. Number two, engaged, right? We want to make sure that they're learning. And three, where they're at a level of blooms where they can actually apply what they learn. Like, you can't, memorization is not going to cut it. Being a word caller is not making you a reader, okay? Because you can quote your math facts. If you can't apply that in a word problem, you are out of pocket. So all of that has to come full circle, but it all has to come together. And everybody has to be on the same page.
Okay. Yeah, I think that. And so I want to kind of start winding down. Well, not start winding down. I want to wind down. Uh, This has been a really dope conversation, and I definitely appreciate having you both on, sharing not just your perspectives, but what you know to be true from being a part of the education system for the last 2+ decades. Thank you both for teaching our children, for engaging us in this conversation. And to close, I would just love to hear what kind of, Keisha, you mentioned a lot today and then the other day, the progressive nature of the education system. And as I listen to you speak, as I listen to Clarence, and I think about what school was like for me versus what you're talking about now, I'm hearing the progressive nature, and perhaps maybe I can see it in a way some of the younger kids are conducting themselves. But so my question is this, to close: is the reform coming fast enough, or is it like, do we need to speed it up? Is there something that we can do to help speed it up, or is it moving at an adequate pace?
What I see as educational reform is not something that can be written in legislation.
Hmm.
You- no legislation is going to impact the heart of the educator. You have to love what you do, and you have to love why you do it. And I tell my staff this is my quote: working with you never feels like work, right? Because I truly enjoy what I do. And like Clarence said, he gets paid to go to work and do what he loves to do. I mean, who wouldn't want to do that? I hear football players say, hey, I go and get to play football every day. That's what I love to do. Baseball, Major League. We go to work every day loving what we do. It just takes my heart to another level when I see my students in medical school, when I see them in nursing school, when I see them successful, when I see them as great parents, as responsible citizens, voting, whatever it is, whatever lesson from my classroom that they took and applied to a positive impact in their life, that gives me such joy. So the reform is in each individual district. I believe that the people that we elect to be our superintendents of schools, school boards, I think all of that is relevant to the reform in totality. The federal government can bring down legislation that says we have to do a standardized test. But how we prepare our students, it has nothing to do with the federal government. It has everything to do with the teachers and the administrators in those buildings, in those districts, making the change. The innovation that I'm speaking of, this is not coming from the federal government. It's coming from within my building. It's coming from within my community. And so that is being able to put my finger on the pulse of what is needed. And then meeting those needs as best we can with what we've been given. One of our hashtags at our school is winning with what we have.
Mm.
Okay, think about that for a minute. Winning with what we have. My teachers would come to school a couple years ago and they would say, we don't have parent participation. I'd say, okay, now what? Our kids don't do their homework. Okay, now what? Our kids don't come, they come to school late. Okay, now what? Because what I was getting was a bunch of known facts about our community. But see, you came into the school year already knowing that. The question is, now what? What is the plan? How do we combat tardiness? How do we talk about getting kids to love reading or to love mathematics? What are we doing? Because this is what we get paid to do. What are we doing to effect that change? Stop telling me what I already know. I can look that up on Wikipedia, that in urban communities, there's a low percentage of parent participation. I get that stat anywhere. But the question then becomes, what do we do about it? And how do we do it? And what in each prescription is not going to be the same. What I do in my building is not going to work in Clarence's building. Maybe pieces, components, but in totality, he has to look at his community and its needs versus I look at my community and my needs. My parents need food. My district is in a food desert. So guess what? We as a school, all the Atlanta Food Community Bank, and said, hey, my parents, my kids are hungry. Hungry kids can't learn, right? every Thursday of the month, the second Thursday of the month, there was my teachers, my administration, my principal, we're all out there passing out what? Produce, fresh produce and non-perishables. Now, was it enough? Probably not. But it showed what? That we valued them and their needs. And so I promise you, one of my greatest works is flipping the pyramid. And that's talking about that hierarchy of needs, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Flipping it, right? So that what you need, those basic needs become the most important piece, the largest piece, that we focus on that. Because I believe that if we can meet the needs of the children and their families, we can then begin to funnel down to what's important, right? So we can, because when you turn a funnel down, you can really pour it in a very particular position. It's not just running everywhere from the large part. When you have that really, that tip, you can intentionally pour in a particular place. And I think that's what our kids need. They need some intentional pouring of excellence, an intentional pouring of support, an intentional support, an intentional pouring of what is needed to be successful, and understand that. And with that, I think we can move reform beyond legislation. I just believe that that has to be internal in your district, in your building, in your classroom kind of situation.
Okay. And so, Mr. Monsanto, I guess what I'm going to do for you is ask a slightly different question based off of what one of the comments are. But really quickly, I just want to say to what Keisha said, um, I love playing football, and don't nobody pay me for that. Just so we're clear, like you don't always get paid to do what you love. But it does help to be getting paid to do what you love. And I'm sorry, what'd you say? Couldn't hear you, Keisha.
I said it is a great day when you get to be when you get paid to do what you love. It is really a wonderful thing. It makes
Yeah.
getting up every day a lot easier. Yes.
Oh, for sure. Like, that's man, getting paid to do what you love is a wonderful thing. But so the comment that I wanted to present to you, Tito, as we close out, um, it says, I love Mrs. Anderson's passion, but I wonder how rare educators like her are. And then there's a follow up, and it says, if every educator had Mrs. Anderson's and Mr. Monsanto's passion and their drive, would we be in our current situation? So I'd love to hear you close out speaking to those two, like how rare it is to find the passion that you two have in other teachers, and how different the education system would look if it wasn't so rare.
It's not as rare as people think. It really isn't. But what you find is that there are people who won't go into education because of the stigma, honestly, in terms of when you look at the salaries of educators, um, depending on where you're at, it's really not that high. And they tend to pay you like in the past when it was, and it's still a male dominated profession. Like it's the second salary in a home. They tend to pay in that way. And so
Mm.
if you come into it and you look at it from the perspective of, okay, depending on where you're at, and if you're in the South, you're looking at making starting out maybe like 25 to 35,000, maybe. Um, People are looking at it like, as opposed to if I go and work uh, at a think tank, because I can honestly say I left because I wanted to make more money at one point and realized money don't make you happy. Um, and so coming back, I was willing to take that pay cut, because for me, enjoying what I do is more important. I can subsidize you. you start figuring out other things that you can do to subsidize your income. But until we educators get the respect, especially classroom educators, and I'm gonna say it like this, because the paradox of education, to me, this is my own belief. The paradox of education is the further you get from working with children, the more money you make. So if you want to make more money, then the whole goal is to become an administrator or work downtown at central office, which it has an impact on children, but not a direct impact. You're not going to make those same type of connections with kids when you're not working as directly with them, especially if you're not. So treating educators as professionals.
Something's your mic is. I don't know what's going on, but you're a little
Okay.
low.
I said treating educators as professionals, because the first thing when people talk about education is important, but what is the first thing they slash? They'll slash an education to pay for something else. Um, and I'm not saying that there aren't other things that aren't as important, but if you don't have an educated populace, then what do you have? And so I think that you will get more people who are passionate about it if honestly you got paid more, you know.
Understood.
Because when you look at other countries, especially for other first world countries, they treat education with the respect that we give lip service.
Wow. Huh.
Charles,
Lip service.
can I just piggyback on one thing that
Yes, yes, ma'am.
like I said, um, and it's true that the further you get away from students, the more it seems to be your pay. Um, One of the things I always tell people when we're talking about education is teaching, and I might have said this on Saturday as well. Teaching is probably the only profession that a teacher must take on more debt to get paid more money. So I have friends that I went to college with, and we all got the same BS degree, and they make six figures. I have 3.5 degrees and just about at that point. So it is absolutely correct. And Clarence and I have had conversations, candid conversations, that he said he would never come out of the classroom because he makes more money than I do. And he's right, you know. But the point is from a leadership perspective, I think it also still goes back to the mindset of the educator. The passion you hear in me is not just the passion as an administrator, it was the passion as a coach, an academic coach, and also the passion of a teacher. And so it is not uncommon for you to walk into my building and find me teaching a small group. It's not uncommon for you to come into my building and see where I have kind of taken over a classroom from a teacher that may not have been feeling well or needed to run to the restroom and continued the lesson. Because what you're finding is more and more educators are now becoming instructional leaders. And so because we have that curriculum background and we have that experience as teachers, we bring a different level of leadership to the office of assistant principal and principal now, because we've been on the front lines and we understand what that means. It's like the person that talks about the military that was actually in the military, right? You know what it's like to serve. And so you can make a statement about it because you had the experience. And I think you're going to find more and more of us in this day and time becoming more instructionally focused and sound. Teachers are going back to school. More and more teachers are going back, one, to secure that bag, right? But two, to kind of get that information that they need in order to be progressive. I have teachers in my building who have a bachelor's degree and have been teaching for 30 years. that is the last time they sat in a formal classroom as far as higher education outside of professional development. So you could see how that gap could make a difference in the instructional delivery. If that teacher is not progressively actively looking for those professional development opportunities to make them better. I've had teachers retire because of technology. I've had teachers just decide, you know what, I'm not going to do this anymore because I don't know how to send an email. So what you're finding is more and more teachers, even if they come in an alternative preparation program, they're coming with a wealth of knowledge that our kids ordinarily would not get. Most teachers that went to college to be teachers, that's all they've ever done was teach. Those of us, and I'm speaking to myself, that went to college and pursued a different discipline and maybe spent some time in a different area and have now come into teaching, come in with a different perspective, possibly in some things that maybe others have not seen. And so that combination makes for a good learning environment where you have people coming in with different sets and talents that actually, bring wealth to the actual learning community itself.
Word. Well, that is all the time that we have for today. Um, thank both of our guests for joining us. Thank you all for tuning into this conversation, engaging in the comments, asking questions, really dope questions, and just really helping this conversation be pushed further and include different various perspectives. We had perspective from the Netherlands come in, so that's something that we look forward to in every conversation that we have, something that we value. Um, this particular conversation is done, but the topic of conversation is going to continue tomorrow. So if you're tuned into this and you're hearing me, tune in tomorrow. We're going to be talking some more about education, and hopefully we'll see you there, engaging in the comments. Thank you again to our guests, and we look forward to catching you the next time.